It's a first presentation. It's gonna be a little bit more techy. So we have quite interesting cooperation with assigning services in the sense that IHS Consulting would be more interested into technological things in cybersecurity, cloud deployments, while signing services would be like legal and business-oriented, let's say, topics. So it's quite, it is quite a good collaboration. So just very quickly about myself. So one of my jobs is being a founder at IHS Consulting. So it's a Riga-based, mostly, company which helps fintechs, banks, payment institutions with their problems around cryptography, integrations with different sorts of identity providers, payment infrastructure, etc., etc. So feel free to reach out if you have any particular questions or doubts about your architecture, about your cloud environment, or even how your technology could meet certain legislative requirements in Europe and beyond. So we understand that. We can speak to you in the same language. All right. So it's a bit long title of this presentation, and it's not so clear. It wasn't even clear for me what I'm going to speak about. But what I want to cover today is where we are with identity management and authentication in a typical enterprise, in a typical company, what's available. Then we'll talk where is it all going, like what Edgar's mentioned. There's a question, why now? So we all see quite a lot of transformations which started due to some viruses in our country. But this transformation is still accelerating because of different global initiatives and events, and we are going to talk about that. And the last one would be, okay, but what's your role? What would you do with all of that? Is it the right time to invest, to learn, and to experiment with these technologies? And how would you do that? So that's roughly the agenda for today. Okay, I hope it's clear. First part, where are we? So we have quite a diverse crowd of people attending, at least based on the registration we've had. I hope that someone is listening right now. I have no idea, to be honest. But we have people with some IT background and CTO background and engineering and business and administration. So we'll try to have this presentation to be consumed properly by all such people. We will not go too deep into technology, more about motivations. But we all kind of can agree that IT environment in any company doesn't get simpler, right? So we have new legislation, new requirements. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to automate sales and accounting and whatnot. So it's all getting more and more complex. Mobile apps right now is the #1 channel for some companies. So you have a bit of mobile apps, you have some custom development. So how do you fit it all together from a security, identity, and authentication point of view, taking into account that digitization is still ongoing? So we all know that we have different types of users. So we have our internal users, help desk operators, system administrators, even management, and they have to have different access rights to different systems, and it's better that we have it audited somewhere so we know what's happening in our company. So I'm not telling you anything new. So before we dive deep into new topics, let's just finalize the terminology. What is authentication and identity management? And yeah, so I actually remember that one of the benefits I've got having a master's degree from Riga Technical University is that on one lecture we've been studying difference between authentication and authorization. I still remember that lesson, and I've got it wrong because on the slide I mixed up authorization and authentication again. Anyway, so we are speaking about authentication is the process of confirming that you, who you claim to be, are the one you claim to be. So I claim to be Dmitry, but I have to prove that I'm Dmitry, right? Somehow. With a password, maybe with some PIN code, who knows? And identity management is a process or a framework of determining if we've understood if I'm really Dmitry, where do I have access to? To some systems, maybe to some doors or anything like that. And companies, especially big ones, like Baltic big ones and world big ones, try to centralize this somehow to be in order and introduce a single sign-on technology. So single sign-on, again, I guess everyone knows what it is. So how do you provide a unified login to all company resources, to third-party system, to custom development systems, to cloud hosted systems, software as a services, by using one, let's say, login. So this approach has obvious benefits. We don't do it for fun or for user experience only. However, user experience is important as well. And that there are different security standards and best practices and data compliances which tend to suggest us that it's not a good idea to have 15 passwords for one person. It's not a good idea to have them not being renewed or not to adhere to certain complexity policies of a password. It's not a good idea to have business critical systems without multi-factor authentication, even if it's like SMS, etc., etc. So having a single sign-on, let's say, approach and some sort of identity management systems gives us an opportunity to centralize all of these rules, data, apply proper data masking, data retention. So if we get some new people in company or people are leaving company, we can change the access in a centralized way, because the scariest thing is when someone goes away, not so, let's say, with some sort of a conflict, and your administrators forget to revoke all the passwords in your systems, and then you realize that all the bad stuff that person could do, right? So I guess most of you have been in such situations, not being fired, but noticing that your colleagues still have access after 6 months. So in recent years, we've seen a race of a single sign-on, let's call it like that, software as a services. So these are, I guess, US-based companies, Okta and Auth0. I was actually surprised to see that they were competing, but then one, acquired another, and now they are one big market leader in this space. And a lot of enterprises actually fully outsource their identity management and single sign-on problems to these companies. And but like if you are in Riga or in Tallinn or in Vilnius, would you outsource all of your single sign-on and identity management problems to these companies? Well, maybe yes, but maybe no. Possible concerns could be data locality. Okay, so they are cloud-based, they're in US. Are you allowed even to send this data there? I don't know. So I'm not saying that these companies cannot give you a tailored solution or to adhere to certain requirements. I'm just flagging up some potential issues which a CIO or CTO should have in order to be investigated before making a decision, right? So liability. So are they liable for mistakes? So what if something happens, if you have a data leak, are they even responsible for that if their employees made a mistake? Custom authentication protocols. So we'll be speaking a lot about EID and EPARAX and what's going on in Baltic states and the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. So is it easy to add a regional authentication provider into one of these apps without contacting them and trying to persuade to implement it for you, which they will not have time to? OEM licensing, it's an interesting one. So if you build a product which you sell to customers, then usually it's a completely different type of pricing structure and completely different type of license. So if you want to build a software which you sell to someone else, relying on software as a service vendor for these key processes is not a good idea. Yeah, but you could ask. And cost, right? So we tend to make it more cheap in these parts of the world. Just an example from their documentation so we know what we're talking about. So these guys in Okta, Auth0, and competing products do a great job to provide several standards means of authentication, user password, SAML, OAuth, OpenID, a few others, and distribute this, let's say, login to all of the corporate infrastructure you have. If you have some custom code, you should integrate with them. So you also get a user session and you're able to log in your system everywhere in your organization. So this is great, it works. Lots of companies use it, no issues here. But let's see a little bit further where is the catch, where might be a catch, right? So that's an interesting slide I've been thinking. So okay, you have an internal IT department who is assigning usernames and giving passwords to your newcomers, to your maybe partners or external agents. But do you really have policies who look after them? Like 2 days before, a few colleagues of mine got new emails and they have mistakes in their names. Like it would mean that there is no 4 eyes principles, there is no control of user management. Of course, I hope that everyone on this webinar is already implementing or implemented approval processes, that these mistakes should never happen, and there is no password like password 2022. But it happens in a lot of organizations with a lot of customers. We're not trying to make photos and put it in Instagram, but it happens very often that you would have an IT department who is supposed to protect your data, but they're doing interesting solutions. And the final question, okay, so your administrator, who is not really controlled by any processor or auditors, is issuing you a secure credential to your system. Would you give this identity a financial loan based on this username and password relying on your system administrator? I will not answer right now, so it's like everyone could think by themselves. So would you be so trusting a credential issued by a traditional IT department in order to do an irreversible actions like sending money to this person when this person requests? First part, recap. We've talked about identity management, authentication, single sign-on. Everyone knows it. SaaS tools are becoming more and more popular in this space. SaaS tools are mostly focused on how to integrate with all of your systems, but on outside you would typically have only standards-based authentication methods. And if you have something really custom, you might be in trouble. And it still starts with username and password and plus multi-factor authentication. And we consider your IT department as a source of truth. Let's keep that in mind for now. So second part, what's next? Okay, so we've spoken about how your administrators issue password to different systems, so I can log in and see some financial reports and CRM data and then back office data and so on and so on. But what about real customers? So those who are coming, let's say, from the street, they want to buy something, and we need to establish relationships relatively quickly. So with customers, the user experience is far more important than with your internal users. So your internal users could be persuaded to suffer a little bit, but customers maybe not. They'll just go to a competitor if there is a competitor. So, and business is always trying to let anyone in as quickly as possible, making shortcuts. But if you're in a regulated market or you want to sign a financial agreement of some sort, you actually have to do some due diligence and request proof of of the identity, of the representation rights, and a typical scenario how you would enroll into a financial system is making photos of your documents, taking a selfie, maybe sending photo of utility bill, maybe sending your account statement from existing bank account, and more and more. So, okay. And what we see is that all these regulations from financial world, which were kind of shockingly overwhelming a few years ago, they are starting to move into a non-financial space as well. Like a good example from our colleagues in signing services is when you want to buy some alcohol, you want to be sure that merchant verifies your age, and the only way possible is to submit a proof your identity, and you have to trust this, that it's not a Photoshop, right? So there's a concept of strong customer authentication, which has been there in finance and banking for years, but it's slowly coming to non-financial space as well. And it's based on the idea that you have three types of proofs of your identity categories. It's knowledge, inherence, and possession. So examples are written on the slide. And in order to be securely authenticated, you have to present two of those. And a simple example could be that you have a device, which is something you possess, and you apply your fingerprint, which is something you are, and that constitutes two factors to authenticate you in a strong way. So it's not some wish, so it's actually a European regulation defining this framework, and it's there for all payments, e-commerce, post-terminal payments. Like if you pay on post-terminal, your first factor is a plastic card, and your second factor is PIN. So same SCA regulation applies uniformly across all authentication, financial or not financial. So is there a strong identity? So when you Google strong identity, you go to some psychology sites, so you can't really figure out. But I've created this term yesterday, so strong identity. And for me, it presenting a digital proof of your identity upon authorization, which can be tracked back to identity provider. So basically, who have given you rights to be that identity? So who have given me rights to be Dmitry? Okay, my parents, but they are not actually lawmakers. So it's actually government who allowed me to be Dmitry. And in this case, it's an identity provider, and I have to somehow securely transmit allowance from government through all the steps to the website when I want to buy alcohol. So let's explore how it's possible in theory and in practice. So I guess everyone who's here at least heard one time about ADAS initiatives, which is not big news. It was there for some time ago. And the concept of it, in a very layman's terms, is that government is one of the guardians and guarantors of the user identity. So they give me a passport, but in the same way they can give me a digital identity, which is based on strong cryptography methods. There is public and private keys and hashes and so on. So for those who understand, it's all based on the same concepts as in payments, let's say, or in any other sensitive area of IT. So it's covered, so all Europe is covered by these requirements. Other locations like UK and some other countries try to do similar initiatives, maybe referencing European initiatives, but globally we see it's quite similar, let's say. And there's a concept of trust service provider, which Edgars will talk more about, but just to mention that the trust service provider is an intermediate entity which can securely confirm that you are what you try to say you are, based on identity issued by, let's say, government in this case. So you could see a map of the recent coverage and situation. And so this map is also explaining why are we having this webinar in Latvia, not in France, because situation in Latvia is a little bit better with electronic identities than in France or Germany. So we are quicker to adapt, and we learned from our neighbors in Estonia fast. Or maybe not so fast, I don't know. So yeah, so just to say that it's happening everywhere in different speeds, but it's sort of inevitable. But something new maybe, which you might just heard in the news or didn't hear in the news, is European digital wallets, where you would have an app where you could securely get evidences of your identity in order of it to be used in different places. So if you securely load your passport or driving license, your device becomes an authorization tool which can present your proof of identity via NFC by tapping or via opening some web application and hitting login and then putting your fingerprint on. So this technology is being standardized and introduced right now. Some Western corporations like Google and Apple have already done it. So they've recently launched their version of wallets. So they tend to start from payments and loyalty cards, because loyalty cards are also payment cards in the modern world. There's no different loyalty or payment. It's just loyalty has a limited balance, which you cannot top up yourself. But the concept would be the same. So these apps, super apps, would have payment cards, loyalty cards, bonus cards, and national ID cards, and of course vaccination cards, all in one place. And you could present them wherever you want, but you control when and to whom to present. So nobody can query it automatically. You have to approve the process of presenting it. And it's even more interesting that, so people who are in crypto maybe and in IT might know a company called Twitter. And Twitter is having some interesting times right now. And Jack, forgot the name. Jack Dorsey, thank you. We actually have some live people here as well. So Jack Dorsey stepped down as a Twitter CEO, if I'm not mistaken, and he founded another company in crypto space, and they founded so-called Web5 project. So you could read their motto on the slide, and it's about how to use blockchain in order for users to keep their identity in the blockchain and allow third-party providers to use them when I approve this. So to me, it sounds exactly the same as the digital wallet initiative. So that's the slide from their documentation. It's done in a funny way, but you could see the same actors who are just named differently, let's say. So here we have a bank issuer. A bank issuer is an identity provider. It could be government who creates a digital identity for you. You load it into your, let's say, blockchain. You have a wallet app. And when you want to present it to someone, you have to approve it on your mobile. And here you go. So you have established a chain of trust between an identity provider and a, let's say, merchant or some organization who wants to check your identity upon authentication. How cool is that? And also, I wanted to mention one interesting standard which is coming, is becoming more and more popular. It's WebAuthn, and from FIDO Alliance, it's a way how you can store some proof on your mobile device backed up with a second factor in order to log in to external sites or resources without actually entering a password, but based on keys which you have on the device, which could come from government, from crypto world, or from anyone else. And so, to recap, what's happening right now that a lot of corporations, companies, and entities and government institutions are working on making new authentication means and standards live. They are going into one direction, but market would be still quite fragmented. They will not be 100% compatible. And also regional differences come into play. So, you know, solutions from Western Europe would not be compatible with Central Europe and Eastern Europe and so on. And why it's important, so you have to take it into consideration when figuring out your identity management and single sign-on authentication strategy, and ask a question, are these big software as a service vendors, can they fulfill all these requirements you would need in the closed time frame? Maybe yes, maybe not. So how to adapt and what to do with this? First of all, I think that the trend is quite clear. We are moving towards passwordless society. And so now we have two categories of people. We have people who use password managers, and we have people who suffer all the time. Like, I have arguments with my wife. He doesn't want to remember her password from Gmail, and her approach to login is to press forgot password and do it again every time. So I can't teach her to remember a password for some reason. And I think that's a common issue. And some statistics from this year, that one of the IT organizations doing audits have measured that above 80% of hacking is because of stolen passwords and weak passwords. That's in consumer space. So you could try to correlate it into a corporate espionage and your employees sharing passwords between each other, and you know, I don't have statistics on that. Another interesting example, which is very practical, so there will be some information in Citadel talk as well, is that for B2B companies. So if you want to authenticate a business entity, you have to do a chain of validation. So you have to prove that a person identity is what he claims to be with some sort of authentication, let's say with EID. Then you have to understand which companies does this person have rights to represent, as with signatory rights. It could be quite complex because a company could have multiple people to have signatory rights. So all of them have to be in one place and sign at the same time, etc., etc. Some complex rules. And so before signing an agreement with a B2B entity, with a business entity, you have to validate all of this. And while authentication problem is already solved by signing services and integration you could do with EID providers, we've decided to start another project which we called the Baltic Business Registry. Don't Google it yet, it's not live, but it will be in September, which integrates all Baltic company registries uniformly in order so you could make a decision on the spot who should sign contract from one or another business, so you could skip all the manual processes of getting new customers. But maybe next time about that, when this project is live. And so my suggestion and my advice is, if you don't have an IDM tool, identity management, consider introducing one. It really removes a lot of risk from organization. It saves a lot of time, manual work your IT people have to do. And it's not so complex. So as you will learn later today, there are ready-made tools which are not requiring license costs, which could be configured by clicking some interface. So it doesn't require a lot of coding or investment. And it would be great if this solution would be used both for external users and internal users. There will be discussions how to do that as well a bit later. Before choosing such tool, think a little bit in the future, 1-2 years in the future, how would new, cool, convenient authentication methods would be integrated to this tool? Would it be possible, or this is a locked solution which you cannot influence? And at the end, you will be able to onboard customers without manual KYC, KYB processes, at least to some extent. And another kind of provocative thought could be, why would you draw this line between internal and external users? Why would your internal users not be identified by e-identities in the future? So you remove this middleman IT department, which can make mistakes, and you have to rely on what they did. Why wouldn't you authenticate your workers based on a government-issued ID card? Just a thought. I don't have an answer. And it's time for questions, if we have some.